Hi, welcome to the Overland Legend. In the last episode, we covered the Defender Buyer's Guide, and I looked at what you get these days for your money when you buy an old Defender like this one, which is about 25 years old. I also looked at the history of the Defender to understand all the different models and which ones were made and what the differences were. And I looked at some of the tips and on buying. But in this episode, I want to focus on some more of the detail, to look at the really nitty-gritty stuff and go through that checklist so that you can see exactly what you've got and know exactly what the problems are that you can look out for on a Defender. Okay, so first up, just let's understand what type of a buyer are you, because I sort of think there's kind of three types of buyers that there could be, generally speaking. So firstly, you might be someone who's looking for a really good condition vehicle that goes really well, that's no problems. You just want to get in and drive it. You don't want to fiddle with it. You don't want to have any issues with it. And there you're really looking at a newer model Defender, probably a Puma, one that has service history, one that has low mileage if possible, and that you can just get in and drive and have no issues at all. The second type of buyer is when you're looking for something a little bit older, maybe don't want to spend that much, but you also don't really want to have a lot of problems with it. So you're looking for something that's complete. You're looking for something that's running properly, but there could be a few things here and there that need to be fixed. And it could also be a good candidate for a restoration project or a rebuild project. So that would be the second type of vehicle that you're looking for. And then the last one is really just when you're looking for anything and you'll take anything. You have a lot of resources at your disposal to fix things, to do chassis repairs, to replace firewalls, to do patching, to replace diffs and fix up engines. So those are those are sort of the third type where you can, you'd be looking at lots of different types of options, and you really know what you're looking for, and you understand it quite well. So I think the things I'm looking at are mostly sort of in the middle somewhere, where you're just trying to understand what you're buying, and that you don't buy something that's going to cost you a fortune. I mean, anything can be fixed, but at the end of the day, it's how much does it cost you. So, and you need to know that, and just need to know what to look for. So let's have a look at those specifics now. Go through this checklist, and I'm sure it will help you to either know what you're buying or negotiate a better price for that Defender. Okay, so the first item on the checklist is to take a look at the overall condition of the vehicle. What is your impression, and how does it look when you just look at it from the outside and generally? And then what are the things you can look at that gives you an idea of how this vehicle was treated? So the first thing you can look at is, what are the missing parts? Which parts are missing? It doesn't matter how small they are. Have they been repaired? Haven't they been repaired? Even something as small as a wheel nut, or a cover for a wheel nut, or a mud flap. And then look at modifications, non-standard modifications that have been made to the vehicle. That gives you an idea. And then looking at the paintwork. What is the condition of the paintwork? Can you see if it's been repainted before? Anything like that gives you an idea of the past history of the vehicle. You can find out if it's been in an accident or been repaired. Like here, we've got some pop rivets that are rusting, which are steel, which probably should be aluminium. And then looking also to see if you can see any body repair. Checker plate's usually a bad sign, because it usually covers up problem areas, so you don't want too much of that. And then any rust that you see is something to look at and to be investigated more. Wheel rims, the condition of the wheel rims, are they damaged, are they straight, what's the coating like? And then looking at the trim on the inside also gives you an idea if this vehicle was looked after, and if it's been excessively used for its age. So the trim inside, everything from the carpets to the headlining, gives you an idea of what is the condition and how has the vehicle been looked after. And then lastly, the wiring is very important. If the wiring is not standard, if it's in poor condition, if it looks terrible, that can usually be a sign of some rather large repair items. Okay, something else to check out are the wheel bearings. If you just shake the wheel, you can hear there's a bit of a knock. So that's a wheel bearing that's a wheel bearing that's a little bit loose. And if we go around and have a look at the other side, also a little bit loose. So wheel bearings, you can check if they're loose, you need to tighten them, but probably could also be worn. Not a major item, but again something to look at. So one of the big issues that you have to look for on a Defender is rust. And they might, Defender might look really good from the outside because of the aluminium in it, and the body panels still look good. But you have to look underneath to understand what the story is with the rust. There's two things that happen. The one is that the aluminium, where it's connected to the metal, you often will get corrosion there. So that happens in the door skins, all over the vehicle, because the vehicle is basically covered, is sort of a metal frame covered with aluminium. So wherever those two are making contact, when the metal starts to rust, then it causes more corrosion on the aluminium and takes the paint off. But then on the chassis itself, there's quite a few areas that you can look at, mostly at the front and the back of the vehicle, for rust. And it depends very much where you live. If you live in countries that use salt on the roads during winter, then you have a really big problem with rust, especially on the chassis. And if you live in coastal areas where your vehicle gets a lot of exposure to the sea air, you will also find that you have a lot of corrosion problems, more on the firewall and other parts of the body, but also on the chassis. But if you're like me and you're lucky and you live in inland, away from a lot of corrosive environments, you can have a vehicle like this one that I've got here, that's 25 years old and really has only a little bit of surface rust. That's it. There's not even any major rust anywhere, and I'll show you that. So it really depends, where you live. I know also in Australia, there's a lot of areas where you can find vehicles that are very old and have no rust at all. So it really depends where you live and how much you need to pay attention to rust. So let's have a look at some of those sections. In the front, you need to look right at the front where the bumper connects onto the chassis, and those are normally areas where you'll find that you'll get a lot of rust. And you can even you can take something to poke it and bang it to see if the rust is very bad, to see if it comes off. And then when you look at the other areas of the chassis behind the wheel here, the outriggers, where they connect to the main chassis, often there's rust there. And then another great place to look is under the footwell, so just above the chassis, and this is now part of the firewall, and that you should also be able to see from inside. So when you look at under the footwell, and if you see any rust there, over here you can see there's nothing. Everything still looks great, and there's really nothing on the outrigger as well. So the outrigger all looks very good. You can do the same on the back. When you look on the back, similar thing right at the back on the back part of the chassis, also where a lot of water gets in from behind. So what you're looking for there is any rust that you see there on the back. You can look onto the shock mountings, any rust there. And then another favorite place right at the back here on this housing here, the water and mud collects on the inside here. So get a screwdriver in there, see what's in there, see if there's any rust in there, and if there is dirt, it's always a good idea to clean that out. You can also look at the rest of the chassis on this side, and also nothing too bad. So that's all looking good, and really you can see there's really no sign of rust visually on this piece of the chassis. Just looking on the driver's side, under the wheel arch, you can also look at the wheel arch itself to see how that looks, and this all still looks good. Still got some basically paint on, so nothing major. shock housing also a little bit of surface rust there, but that's nothing major. And then the outrigger here, nothing at all, nothing. And then on the footwell also all looking clear, and you can still actually see the color of the paint, so that's all looking good under here. So there's really no sign of rust on the firewall. On the inside of the vehicle, looking at the firewall is also notorious for rusting. You would see the rust coming through at the top here, or all the way down here. These areas can rust quite badly. And then right at the bottom here also you would see rust into the bottom there, so that's a big area. And then looking under the footwells to see what's going on over here, so you can see that it's there's nothing major here, so that doesn't look too bad. And these floorboards all look alright. There's obviously a bit of rust on the nuts, but that's not too bad. And then also looking underneath to see at the top of the firewall if you see anything there, and there's nothing major here that we can see, so that's all looking good. In very bad vehicles you would also find this sill here rusting, but I mean this is still properly galvanized, so no major issues over here. And then the door bottoms also, the doors, checking on the door bottoms, you can see especially on the end here where you'll see it very badly, and perhaps a little bit further down now you can see there is a little bit of rust starting at the bottom corner here, but nothing else up there. And on the outside we don't see any bubbling on the outside of the skin, so that's actually still all looking good. The back door is the worst culprit on all Defenders. The back door is the one that suffers the most, and you can see on this one there is a bit of rust on the bottom. So despite the other doors being okay, this one has some rust, but luckily on the outside only a very little bit right in the corner at the skin. Okay, then looking at the engine for leaks, one of the areas you can look at is the fuel pump, the diesel pump. This one actually I've just replaced it, in fact, because it was leaking at the back, and you know, you could get I got a diesel smell after I'd been driving, which is not right. You should have no smell at all, and it was leaking out of the back here, and yeah, it turns out that diesel pump needed a recondition, so it's been reconditioned. I've put it back, everything's looking good. The other leaks, there should be no leaks on the side of the engine, nothing out of the tappet cover. It might be a little bit of sweat, that's it, but nothing else. So around the top of the engine there should be absolutely nothing. It should be spotless, and that should be like that on both sides of the engine. You shouldn't see anything major. When you look at the bottom, you're looking at underneath the front of the engine to see if there's anything leaking out the front, so that could be the front crankshaft seal leaking, or at the back the rear crankshaft seal that would leak out of the bell housing. So if there's some oil coming out of the bell housing, we'll have a look under there now. Okay, looking under the engine, looking at the back of the engine at the bell housing to see if there's anything coming out there. So you can see it is a little bit dirty, so there is a bit of sweat out there. There doesn't seem to be anything major dripping, but that's where you would look at to see if there's a major oil leak at the back. And then looking at the back at the transfer box also to see if there's any major leaks from the transfer box at the back. The swivel hubs also an area to check for leaks, and that would be leaking out the bottom. Not a major thing to repair, but it's something that you would need to know, to look at, to know to fix or to negotiate on the price. And then the other part under the engine, if you look right at the back, the power steering pump, to see if there's any leakage there. The power, they can also leak, so that's another area to leak. Basically any leak, any fluid coming out, oil coming out. I mean, Land Rovers are notorious for leaking, but it's a little bit, and I mean, you can actually get it so that it doesn't leak. So but any major leaks are a problem. And then looking at the intercooler, which sits here on the left hand side of the radiator. So on the intercooler, those pipes, you will see there is a bit of black oil sweat around the sides. That is normal because there is oil that comes into the intercooler via the turbocharger. So but if there's a lot of oil, or there's leaking oil out of those pipes, so the pipe at the bottom and this pipe at the top, that would indicate that there's a problem with the turbo, and that there's too much oil coming through, or there is oil coming through in a serious quantity, and or that your intercooler pipes are not fitting properly and are leaking. So either of those two things would indicate that. Checking your water pipes is also a good idea to see if there's any sign of a leak, or there's any white residue anywhere near the pipes, or a drip or something, historic leak down the side. So those are important things to look at. The water leaks you will often see with a white residue, as there's some corrosion happening around that pipe area, and that's not a good thing. So everything should be clean and no leak at all, and the radiator level should be correct. Okay, then two other things to check in the engine which are very important. Looking at the water in the radiator, you shouldn't have any oil in the water, obviously, because it's just supposed to be water. So that would be, you know, if the water was brown and thickish, that would be a really big problem, indicating that there's oil in the water and that there's some problem in the engine with contamination. Then the other thing is also to look at the oil or water in the oil, and that you would see, if you look at the dipstick, you would see some brownish liquid sort of towards the top of the dipstick, and that would indicate a problem. So basically anything that's not looking like oil is not going to be good inside the engine. So those two things to check. Okay, then let's have a look at the engine and see how that looks and how that sounds. So first part is just starting it up. Shouldn't be any issue starting it. There we go, starts easily. You want to, you know, nothing sounding very bad. You just want a nice smooth sounding engine, no whistling, no noise from the bearings. So diesel engines are fairly simple. The main thing to look at on a diesel, besides it sounding right, is looking at what's coming out of the exhaust. You don't really want to see any smoke coming out of the exhaust. You shouldn't see anything major. When you start it up, there might be a little puff, but then once it's running, you shouldn't see anything coming out. When you're accelerating, you shouldn't see any major smoke. You might see a little bit as you accelerate, but you shouldn't see too much smoke. So any smoke that seems unnatural and not normal is definitely going to be a sign of something to look at. So probably you're looking at either the injectors or the diesel pump. It usually means it's overfueling or underfueling, or the timing's not right. So something to do with the injectors and the fuel supply of the diesel. But really the telltale signs are looking at the exhaust and seeing what's coming out from a smoke point of view. Okay, so then once you've got it started and you can take it for a drive, then just some of the basics: checking that all the gears engage properly, that the clutch works properly, checking that the low range works and that engages properly. If it hasn't been used, it could have seized, and so that could be a problem. Also checking that the diff lock engages. Does the light come on? Does that all work? So all of those need to work comfortably, smoothly, without any major problems. When you pull off, you don't want to hear too much of a loud clunking noise. The clunks that you would hear are mostly or are related to the wear in the transmission. So you find that the diffs start to wear a little bit, and then also in the gearbox there could be a little bit of wear. So all of that play builds up. You find it especially in a 110. You would hear that clunk more so than in a 90, but you usually hear that when you pull off either forwards or backwards. It's kind of like there's a point where you just start, and then you feel like you should be going, and then you aren't quite going, and then all of a sudden you are, and that's a bit of a clunk. So the louder that clunk is, or the bigger that delay is, usually some transmission problems. It shouldn't sound terrible. There can just be a clunk when you pull away, but that gives you an indication of transmission. Then when you're driving, looking at the steering to see that the steering is direct, that there's no looseness in the steering, no major play in the steering, and definitely no vibrations through the steering. And then as you travel at different speeds, checking to see if there's any vibration, any noise that doesn't seem normal, that seems excessive. Land Rovers are not the quietest things, but a Defender should be fairly smooth and shouldn't be too loose. And also if you hear knocking, especially going over bumps, a little bit is normal, but anything that sounds bad, rather check it out. It could be something that's loose in terms of the suspension, or even worn things, or even if some of the suspension parts aren't connected properly. So checking all of those things, and then any major loud or alarming noises when you're driving is not going to be a good sign and a good idea, and get a second opinion or get some advice on that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that checklist. So it's quite a long checklist. I think it's, as I've mentioned before, it's a good idea if you actually do have a list to go through and tick those items off, either for you to know about and to deal with when you need to make your final decision on the price, or even to walk away if you realize that it's really too much and you don't want to look at it. So if there are any things you've thought about, any things you've experienced with buying vehicles, then please drop us a comment below and let us know what else we should look at and what people should look out for, and let us know your experiences of buying Defenders. So I think that sums it up from me. I think it's if we've covered everything. The first episode sort of a little bit more general, but to give you an idea of what you're looking at in a Defender. And I think in this one we looked at all the details, and it really comes down to how much do you want to spend, how much work do you want, how much worry do you want, and that's a decision you need to make. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like this video, and feel free to subscribe, and look out for some other videos on my channel coming, and I put them up every second Friday. You can find a new video. So thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.